this is a video report on the 100-point DBMM mini competition that we held at the Hong Kong Society of Wargamers annual general meeting at the start of May. So we had 10 different generals, and all the armies were selected from book 2. So we had a great range of different armies. They were all 100 points as per the list in the DBMM 100-point guide. There were no stratagems, inert, or brilliant commanders. The battlefield was going to be 60 by 60 with preset battlefield with deployment as in the rules. The final thing to highlight was the victory points. The victory points was 3 points for breaking the enemy army, 2 points for disheartening the enemy, and 1 point for inflicting over 10% casualties, 0 for anything less. So this victory point schedule is really designed to give everyone the incentive to fight all in, not sit out and hide from the enemy, since there's no difference between a 0-0 draw and losing 3-0. All games were 1 hour, and we were conducted very amicably between the players. So first, I'll introduce the armies and the army lists. I was playing Seleucid, Andrew the Parthians, Dave the Spartans, Tom the Maccabean Jewish guerrillas, Neil Han Chinese with a bunch of chariots, JC was the Marian Romans, Matthew the very flexible ancient British army, Alex, a huge Numidian horde, Richard, Middle Imperial, and Peter from Thailand, the later Imperials. And we had our reserve player, Ken, chose the patrician Roman. So a very nice mix of different armies with which to have some interesting matchups. First up, we have Alex Numidians. Here you see fairly balanced army. We've got a strong elephant to be your breakthrough troops, and you've got quite a bit of flexibility in your regular troops, but a bit low on ME. Andrew's Parthians. It's got a strong cataphract core of 4 cataphracts, including the general. And very flexible around that, the horse archers. However, they're only light horse F, so unlikely to stand up in combat, and a few auxiliaries to give some rough terrain capability. My Seleucid list, and I consider this a bit of a killer list. You have the Wedge Knights as the main fighting force. If you meet knights, you've got an elephant to frighten them, and your pike and auxiliary S form a very strong screening force to protect your flanks and to make sure that the knights can go in without harassment. Dave Spartans have, of course, the core of Spear S Spartans, backed up by the Spear O, very efficient for their size, and also a couple of spicy Gauls to give them some punch against the Roman armies. JC's Marians, you've got a very strong blade S line to do the bulk of the fighting, and that's supported by an elephant to help against the knights. And you've also got very flexible cavalry force with 4 cavalry, including the general, who can operate on the flanks. Ken's patricians, managing to fit 11 troop types into only 100 points. Highlights are the artillery, which could give trouble on a narrow battlefield. You've got some irregular lancers, that Knight F, that is going to be trouble controlling. So impetuous troops that he is counting on his regulars to support. Matthew's Ancient British taking advantage of the all-chariot option, which enables him to deploy them as Warband S or as CVO chariots, depending on the terrain and the matchups. Neil's Han Chinese with a core of 3 chariots, no other Knight O in Book 2, so these should be very good against enemy knights. And then a very balanced army with some warband to give a threat on punch, and auxiliary and bow, and 3 CVO to round out the lineup. Peter joined from Thailand and making this an international competition, and he brought the late Imperial Romans. So a balanced army with a strong legionary corps with 1 Blade X to frighten knights, rough troop capability with the Siloi and the auxiliaries, and some punch with a Knight F and Warband O. Richard brought the Middle Imperial Romans, so a very strong legionary army with praetorians and clubmen, supported by auxiliaries and some CV with light horse. And finally, Tom brought the Maccabean Jewish, an enormous army, so the highest in terms of ME at 25.5, but also in terms of number of elements, with 40 elements in total, but very light troops, so lots of Horde S, lots of auxiliary O, and nothing, so relying on quantity rather than quality. In order to keep the games fair and also fast moving, we had preset terrain with 5 different ancient battlefields. So we had Cannae, which was an open plain. We had cynocephali, where there was a central hill which both sides had to race to, with half of it rough. We had Ustus, where there was a rough river across the center of the board separating the 2 armies, with a hill and difficult on the side. There was Teutoburger Wald, the most crowded map, where there was a narrow avenue of open ground between 2 difficult woods. Finally, Zama, open plain in the middle, but both armies had rough terrain behind them. So none of these terrains were, they are all symmetrical, so that each side is balanced. And also, some armies will do well on the open battlefields, other armies will do well on the more crowded battlefields, so hopefully there is something for everybody. Since there are 4 rounds in the fight, every army will fight on 4 out of these 5 battlefields. The final component was the matchups, which were decided randomly, so that everyone is playing a different general on a different battlefield in each of the 4 rounds. This is the Teutoburger Wald map with the woods on the side and a narrow avenue in the middle for the fighting. This is the cynocephali map with a big central hill, and half of the hill is rough ground for infantry. This is the Issus map with a central rough river that's rough for both mounted and foot, and on one side a hill which is difficult at the top and then bare gentle down at the bottom of the slopes. This is the Cannae battlefield with Dave's Spartans ready to deploy, a river narrowing the width and a hill on the opposite side, but otherwise a bare plain to fight on. And here we have Peter and Richard getting ready to fight the first game on Zama with rough terrain immediately behind their battle line of Romans. Tom's Maccabean Jewish army has a huge horde with 10 Horde S as his center and then lots of light troops on the flank, but nothing that can really punch. Alex has brought his Numidians. They can dance, they can maneuver, but they can't really fight very well. Andrew's gone for a mobile army with lots of light horse F. That could be great on an open battlefield, but on Teutoburger Wald, where he starts off, it is a liability as they can't operate on the flanks. Peter's later Romans crash through the lines of the Middle Imperial Romans on Zama, putting the Richard's Romans to flight. Neil's Han Chinese deploy against Dave's Spartans on Issus, a frontal fight where there is nowhere to hide. Matthew's Ancient British takes on JC's Romans on Cynocephaly. The Romans are deploying well off the hill. They do not want to take a downhill charge from the combination of CV and Warband S. On Teutoburger Wald, the Seleucid Wedge Knights crash into the Parthan light horse who are screening their cataphracts. Across the line, there is the elephant and 3 Wedge Knights, and they put the Parthian light horse to flight, which unfortunately takes them off the board, opening up a hole on the Parthian side. The Parthians try to counterstrike, but without overlaps on the Wedge Knights, it is hard for their troops to make an impact. The light horse fast are quickly taken down. This battlefield is not a good matchup for the Parthians. They need open flanks. However, the Parthians go down fighting. Their auxiliary plug the gap in the line and get 2 overlaps on the Seleucid elephant, which goes down, making it a tempered victory for the Seleucid. Alex's Numidians and Tom's Maccabean Jewish go at it on Issus. However, both armies are so large and lacking in quick-kill troops, so they fight to a draw. Back on Cynocephaly, the ancient Brits had tried charge after charge on the Roman lines, including one where they hard-flanked the opposition, but the Roman line holds strong, ending in a draw. JC sets up his Romans on Zama. The heavy infantry are in the rough, and the cavalry are deployed on a flank. Neil's Han Chinese going up against the Numidians on Cynocephaly. Neil has a very subtle tactic, which is to slam and charge straight downhill into the weaker Numidians. It works. Peter's watching intensely as Tom maneuvers his Jewish through the woods on Teutoburger Wald. However, he is able to drive up the center and destroy the Maccabean army before the flanking maneuvers have time to work through. JC's Romans get a hard flank on the Seleucid Hypaspes, but their S enables them to bounce the attack, and they live to fight another day. Just when the Seleucids thought that they were turning the fight against the Romans around, their elephant dies on a 6-1 die roll to the Siloi, and that gives the win to JC's Marian Romans. Andrew's Parthians go in on a thin line of Richard's Romans. Richard wonders whether his line is strong enough to hold. Tom tries to hold the Romans back on Teutoburger Wold. Matthew deploys a formidable line of ancient Brits' chariots against the Numidians on Cannae. Looks like there is little to slow them down. The Parthians take on the Jewish on Zama. With impetuous Horde S, it is inevitable that Tom will have to come out of the rough. Traditional to have a Roman civil war, this is JC's Marians taking on Richard's Middle Imperial Roman. Against Peter's Romans on Cynocephali, Dave deploys his Spartans at the bottom of the hill. He doesn't want to engage the blade while they have downhill advantage. JC looks happy as his Marians overrun their successors on Teutoburger Wold. The Parthians manage to hold back the swarm of Maccabean Jewish on Zama, but Tom's army only finally goes down when his general falls, leading the charge. Peter repeatedly charges in, but the red Spartan line holds solid. The Jewish Maccabean army does have the most colorful flora of any army. With Jewish rebels flowing all round them, the Parthian form a all-round defense and manage to kill enough to break the Jewish army. A clash at the top of the table. Neil's Chinese take on Matthew's Brits, and with a very narrow frontage, it doesn't give scope for the British to lap round the Chinese flanks, and they have to take the night charge head on. Parthians and Romans are engaged in heavy combat on the slopes of Issus. The decisive game was the Seleucid against the Han Chinese. Neil had a great plan. He was going to screen the Seleucid elephant with his Siloi, but then he rolled a 1 for pips, which meant that the elephant could go in against the Chinese general and was able to kill him on the second round of combat. So a big swing based on rolling a 1 on the dice. Andrew's Parthians take on Peter's Romans on Issus. The Parthians are looking to take advantage of the gap between the river and the difficult in order to outflank the Romans. JC's rock-solid Marian Romans take on the Jewish on Cannae. That looks like the Jewish have not any troops that can really slow the Romans down. On Zama, the Numidians take on the pride of the Greeks, the Spartans. Alex and Dave engaged in a tough fight with the rock-solid Spartans against the much wimpier Numidians. The Parthians and Romans are engaged in heavy combat on the slopes of Issus. On Cynocephali, Richard's Romans make the decision to take a downhill charge from the Seleucid army with pikes, elephants, and wedge knights. Unfortunately, it does not end well. 3 Blade S go down in 1 turn, although it does leave the Seleucid general open to a flanking hit, but he just manages to survive, and with that the Seleucids win the game. Andrew's Parthians create a decisive breakthrough on the open part of the line at Issus, and the flanking move destroys the Roman army. The final battle of the tournament, The Spartans are beating the Numidians, grinding them down. It is hard for the Numidians to be able to dent the Spartan line. The final scores, joint winners were Neil and Chris with 10 points each, with JC a very close runner-up on 9, and every army managed to inflict at least some casualties. And this is the winner of the Best Painted General. This is Tom's Maccabean Jewish command with extra trees and extra fiery hammer from the Jewish commanders. And this is the winner of the Best Painted Army. It is Andrew's Parthian army, and you can see the cataphracts and the light horse F. These are Zeiston figures, and they've been painted by Andrew brilliantly. Really pop on the table. And here we have Neil in his final battle against Matthew. It is the Han Chinese against the ancient British. The ancient British didn't really have a chance against Neil's Knight O, just driving up the middle on Teutoburger Wold and nowhere for Matthew to run. So the Han Chinese got a 3-point win, and that made Neil the runner-up in the overall competition. And here we have our generals at the end of the day, still smiling. The 100-point competition format with 4 rounds is really intense, but great fun. You get to experience lots of different battlefields and armies in one afternoon, a great afternoon of gaming. A final shot of our generals. All the games were played in a very gentlemanly manner, and it was pretty intense to do 4 games in such a tight schedule, but we all had fun and will be repeating the competition soon. Would recommend anyone to try this format. It's a great way to get newcomers and less experienced players into the game and have a huge variety in the same time as you would do a full 400-point DBMM game.